Tonight on Mark Latham's Outsiders, is there any fairness in the world? We've got the contrasting stories of Kathy Griffin, who's been allowed into Australia even though she's responsible for the mock beheading of Donald Trump, that dreadful event, contrasting that with the Bendigo 3, who did a mock Islamic beheading, and they're before the Melbourne courts next week. We're also talking to Major General Jim Molan about the North Korean missile crisis. We've got Kirralie Smith here to talk about halal scamming. We've got Zeg's Cartoons, the great Zeg will be here. We've got the Outsiders Outhouse and the Left Lunatic of the Week, a bloke who's been arguing with statues. I'm coming to you in front of the Spencer Hotel in Whyalla, South Australia. It's a great show. Thanks for watching. Trigger warning viewers, you've entered a very unsafe space. This is Mark Latham's Outsiders, Australia's most politically incorrect news and current affairs program. We try to give you the other side of the story, the events and activities and news you just don't see in the mainstream media. We try to give you the all-important straight talk. Please remember our website, marklathamsoutsiders.com. You can register there, it's on the screen, marklathamsoutsiders.com. Register for all the Rebel Australia activities, our campaigns, petitions, all the activities to fight for freedom of speech and freedom of activity in Australian politics. And on that front, one of the very, very important things we're doing is to save Australia Day, to push back against the madness out there, moving the National Day, rewriting statue inscriptions, tearing down statues, this left lunacy. We're pushing back against it. So please support our petition, saveaustraliaday.com. The website is there, saveaustraliaday.com. Now, one of the most important issues we try and pursue at Mark Latham's Outsiders is freedom of speech. We know there are federal government laws like 18C that restrict freedom of speech. We know there's a whole pall of political correctness across Australia where certain things can't be said. Well, the other thing we try to pursue is the fair treatment of people. And at the opening of the show, I want to introduce a guest who's part of that agenda of fair treatment. So many Australians say all they want is for the system to treat people fairly. Well, I want to introduce Chris Shortis. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. And you're part of a group known as the Bendigo 3. And I want to compare and contrast the treatment you're receiving under the legal system in Australia with some other people who've done things, I think, comparable to what you've done or even worse.
Yes.
And they're let off totally, even welcomed into Australia as some kind of hero to make money out of our country. We'll come to that in just a moment. But in your circumstances, late in 2015, you were protesting against the application for a mosque to be built in Bendigo. Big controversy in the city of Bendigo. And you staged a mock Islamic beheading, and you've now been charged by the Victorian DPP under Section 25(2) of the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, which reads, on the grounds of religious belief, you've intentionally, they say, allegedly, incited serious contempt for or revulsion or severe ridicule of another person or class of persons with this mock Islamic beheading. Let's just have a look at what happened in front of the Bendigo Council that day.
We're just going to give you a bit of a taste of our own religious culture. Carry on, brother. Akbar. Allah Akbar. Takbir. Allah Akbar. Allah Akbar.
Now, I don't approve of that. I don't think it's the best way to protest against a local development issue, but you've been charged. What is the nature of the charges, and how will you defend yourself in the Melbourne courts next week?
Well, the nature of the charge is that we did that stunt, and the charge is stated on October 4th, 2015, in a participation of a video with the intention of inciting serious contempt, revulsion and ridicule for a class of persons. Now, this stunt outside of Bendigo, as you said, is about our political protest against a proposed mosque, because we know as Australians, we know as fair-minded people that increased Islamic population increases the risk of terrorism. And we were critiquing what is a tenet of the Islamic faith. Quran chapter 8 verse 12 states, "Remember your Lord inspired the angels with the message, I am with thee, give firmness to the believers, and I will instill terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, smite you above their necks, and smite all their fingertips off them." It was to demonstrate the dangers of Islamic migration and indeed aspects of the Islamic faith, which I believe that stunt in itself was to demonstrate that Islamic tenets of religion is contrary to Australian law.
So it was a stunt. You're defending yourself in the courts next week.
Yes.
What are you going to say?
Well, I'm going to challenge the validity of the charges themselves without obviously going into too much detail, but I have a profound legal defence, and it is a matter of law, and it is a matter of fact that what we did is, I'm just going to challenge the fact that what we did was completely lawful.
Well, not from you, but other sources. I've seen the DPP charge sheet
Yes.
Against you and
Yes.
The two others, Blair Cottrell and Neil Erickson.
Yes.
And it seems from the charge sheet that there's no plaintiff, in that no Muslims complained about that.
That's right.
So nobody's been aggrieved about it, or lodged any official complaint that we know of. And in terms of inciting some sort of reaction, there's no group that have been incited to undertake violence or any activity. So how can you be charged here under this section if there's no plaintiff and there's no group that's actually been incited by your actions?
That's why the law itself must be challenged in its validity, because in essence what they are trying to achieve is, it's the same thing if you're in Saudi Arabia. If you mock Islam, you'll be charged under blasphemy laws, and it really smells like blasphemy laws in disguise.
So in terms of freedom of speech, would you apologise for what happened?
No.
No? You
I will not. I'll never
No?
apologise for critiquing a religion which beheads people. Saudi Arabia beheads more people than ISIS. They use it as a form of capital punishment because they derive their punishment from their texts. It's Quran chapter 8:12 and Quran verses 47. Chapter 47 verse 4, and it's written numerous times in the Hadiths. It is part of their Islamic text. Now, you cannot be taken to court for critiquing religious tenets. You cannot, right?
Well,
I will prove that.
You have
yeah,
been.
I
So
have
you'll
been.
be arguing that.
Yes.
My assessment is that that type of protest where you're mimicking something that Islamic State does, you should have received a warning, a request to state you wouldn't do it again. But it seems to me that the real problem here is the inconsistency under Australian law. You've got to face 3 days of hearing, set down in the Melbourne Magistrates Court next week with your two colleagues. All the trauma, the expense, the worry, and you face a criminal penalty of up to 6 months in jail.
That's right.
Up to 6 months in jail under this Victorian statute. Now, meanwhile, we got the news yesterday that Kathy Griffin is coming to Australia for a tour of the nation. You might remember Kathy Griffin earlier this year absolutely disgraced herself with something very similar to what Chris has done. Most Australians would say even worse, when she had this ridiculous mock beheading of Donald Trump. Let's have a look at the footage.
Hold it back here.
Same exact thing we just did. That's it.
Okay.
Rotate a little bit this way. Other
This
way,
way or
other way, other way. That's it right there. Pull it up. Just drop it.
Now, supposedly she's an American comedian, she's a D-lister, one of the C-grade celebrities, an absolute waste of existence, Kathy Griffin. But that was supposed to be an imitation of what Islamic State would do to Donald Trump. And Kathy Griffin has said that she was under Secret Service investigation for 2 months. Now that's very substantial in itself. Yesterday in the Australian media, she repeatedly said she'd withdrawn the apology. She had previously apologised to the hurt that caused Donald Trump and his family, particularly his youngest child. She's withdrawn that apology, so now basically boasting about that atrocity, saying that that's an endorsement she will give to that type of activity. How has she been allowed into Australia? We have a good character test for people to get a visa to come into Australia. We deny access to Holocaust deniers, people, domestic violence perpetrators, anyone who's been involved in activities that might incite political violence. Now, I would argue Kathy Griffin there has put in an absolute shocker. How is it she's going to tour Australia? She's appearing in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth. She's going to our #1 cultural venue, the Sydney Opera House, $90 a ticket. She's coming here to make big money out of Australia, having undertaken that atrocity for which she is now quite boastful about. It seems to me to be an absolute shocking, disgusting double standard that she's allowed into the country, trying to make money out of Australia, Well, Chris, you're in the Magistrates Court. How do you see this double standard?
Easy, it's quite easy. It's about politics. I stand for a more national side of politics. She stands for the Hammer-Sickle type politics. She's obviously some leftist Marxist and tried to disguise her BS under the guise of art. And the fact that she's done this and she's actually getting away with it just proves the double standards of the left. You've got to remember with the left...
Well, the double standards of the Australian government. Peter Dutton is letting her in as the immigration minister. She's getting a visa
because they're captive.
And supposedly she's said to be of good character.
Well, they're captive to the Marxist agenda. They're captive to the fact that, you know, she can cry, well, you're discriminating against me because I'm a woman, I'm discriminating against me because I'm a feminist, this is all patriarchal. It's all Marxist BS. And that is the essential difference. Even the so-called conservative side of politics in this country is hijacked by a Marxist agenda.
Yeah,
it's
well, you've made videos highlighting double standards in this area. Let's have a look at one of them.
You've got the left, who politically expressed themselves by burning effigies of Tony Abbott. You've got Muslims who expressed in their outrage of someone who did a mock video of them in 2012. They're in Sydney, running around with signs and placards. Behead those who insult Islam and behead those who insult the Prophet.
Now, we saw the young boy there holding up the sign, apparently given to him by his mother in Hyde Park, Sydney in 2012. And that's obviously something that's unacceptable in Australia. A sign given by the mother saying, behead those who insult the Prophet. At the time, the New South Wales minister responsible, Prue Goward, said, well, maybe the mother just gave the sign for a giggle. So, Chris, how do you stomach this? The idea that the double standard of that mother being dismissed as doing something for a giggle in 2012, something your average Australian found absolutely repulsive, yet you and your two colleagues are before the courts for something that would be regarded as comparable. Why wasn't she taken to court?
Well, it comes down to the essence that, you know, maybe these politically correct Marxists, you know, were considering her cultural sensitivity in their BS line. This is the reason why I, as an Australian, have been triggered, and I'm not going to rest until I put the disease of political correctness to the sword, because this has triggered a path for me which I will not rest until, one, PC is destroyed, or two, that I give up my last breath.
Well, there are so many double standards. Recently, Mohammed El-Mouli, the head of halal certification, put out a Facebook post saying that the white race will be extinct in 40 years, that white men like you and me, we should go suicide and find a cemetery plot. Where was the action against him under any state law or the federal provision for 18C? We've had politicians demonising people in the Senate because of their white skin colour. Sarah Hanson-Young, Sam Dastyari, it's gone on with Yasmin Abdel-Magid describing Brisbane as white as F. I mean, there's so much anti-white racism. None of them are touched under 18C or any other provision. Has it got to the point where, with this political correctness, the double standard that you're a victim of, that really the left, who criticise you on many fronts, are actually going to turn you into a martyr because of just the injustice of the double standard under Australian law?
Well, let's just put it this way. It's acceptable to go after people like me and you being white because we're Nazis, we're homophobes, we're bigots, we're all sorts of name-calling because of that Marxist agenda. It's morally acceptable to go after people like me, but to actually reverse the foot and question and obviously attack their ideology or have a different opinion to them, it's immoral, so therefore it's acceptable for them to go and wage an ideological war against us. And I'd like to warn all these politically correct people, these Marxists, these PC brigade out there, you continue this crap, right, I'm telling you now, nationalism is only going to grow in this country.
Well, you've been involved with a group called United Nationalists of Australia. Your critics say you're a white supremacist. I've read some of your stuff and looked at it, and you seem to be keen on conspiracy theories. My view is there's not enough room in the world for the papal, Jewish and Muslim conspiracies you talk about. You're now studying law and obviously looking to get past this court case. Do you regret those statements in the past, and are you, as your critics say, a white nationalist?
I'm a white nationalist and I have no regrets. And white nationalism is a mute word, because if I'm a Nazi, Arthur Corbett was a Nazi too. Henry Lawson was a Nazi too, because you've got to remember this great democracy that we have in Australia, our constitution was founded by people who wanted white Australia. Right? Well, and these people are enjoying our freedoms, and they're actually using our freedoms against us. And, you know, if I'm a white supremacist, well, the Japanese are Asian supremacists.
So
the
you
Chinese,
deny that as well? You don't
white
regard
supremacists.
you don't regard white people as superior to other races?
No, but white people have done one thing that other races haven't done. You know what that is? Fought against slavery. Name me another race that's fought against slavery.
So you would not accept a depiction of your past comments as those of white supremacy? You believe all races are equal and should have equal opportunity to thrive in a society?
I believe every race, creed and culture has a right to have a homogenous state, the right to preserve their culture and existence, right? And that exists in the world, except if you're a white person.
Well, I believe that your matter shouldn't be in the courts next week. That's my own assessment of this, especially with so many double standards around. I hope you get your law degree. You're hoping to practice the law in the future?
I really am, because this is a political pursuit that I must embark on. I have plans which are set out over the next 10 years. And if I just may say something about this personal activism, I got involved because I lost my firearms licence because of my political activism. I had the age right about me through this rogue reporter called Luke McMahon, who also defamed a fellow nationalist colleague of mine in the most grotesque manner, and they told all these untruths about me. You know, I'm this gun-toting anti-Muslim campaigner that was, you know, going to wage a holy war against Islam, where I've only attacked an ideology. And if you were to take all my statements and put everything into view, you would understand every bit of context what I'm trying to say.
Well, thanks for appearing on our show this evening. We do try and cover the stories you just don't hear in the mainstream media. I'm sure a lot of people would be saying, with Kathy Griffin coming into the country with the inactivity about others who've said dreadful things in Australia, there is an amazing double standard about the Bendigo 3 in the Melbourne courts next week. It seems to me it's a case based not on valid legal interpretations but political agendas. Someone there in the Victorian DPP feels politically offended by what happened. I think the double standard is hopelessly wrong. It's a terrible reflection on Australia that we've come to this, that the Bendigo 3 are in the courts. Kathy Griffin is hoping to rake in the money around Australia with her tour. I just think it's plain wrong, and we need to be a bit more consistent. Rule of law, fair treatment of all Australians. That's what we stand for here at Mark Latham's Outsiders. Thank you, Chris Shortis, for being here.
Thank you, Mark.
And in a short moment, we'll be back to talk to Jim Molan about the situation in North Korea. Welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders, where it's a great privilege to be joined by Major General Jim Molan, who's one of Australia's most distinguished Army commanders. He was Chief of Operations for the multilateral forces in Iraq in 2004, and since leaving the military has racked up one of the great achievements of Australian public life. Jim was one of the authors of the Abbott government's successful Stop the Boat strategy, perhaps the most successful, some would say the only successful thing that's happened in federal government in the last 10 years. And Jim's also very active inside the Liberal Party. He should have been the top of their Senate ticket in 2016, but active in their democratic reform movement. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here.
Well, the one issue everyone's talking about today, of course, is the North Korean missile crisis. Very hard to know what's happening inside that troubled regime in North Korea, what their strategy might be. How do you think it'll play out?
Well, I think it's got a bit of time to run yet, unless, of course, the big issue of preemption comes in. And at the moment, I don't think that North Korea has the capability to mount anything but a suicidal attack on the US or on Japan or on South Korea. So I think that if they are going to, if they're in this game just to create chaos so that they can benefit from that chaos, or to split off Japan and South Korea from the US, then I think if they want to do anything more than that, they've got to develop this capability over a number of years. The big question becomes for all of us, particularly for the United States, is will the United States let them do this? And we all know that under the United Nations and the just war theory, the United Nations rules and the just war theory, you can only go to war if you do it under the auspices of the United Nations, or if you do it in self-defence. And the Americans have a particular view of self-defence, which they might just apply on this occasion.
Well, so far Trump's strategy has been to jawbone and pressure China into playing a more constructive role. Do you think there's any prospect there? I mean, China would have the leverage to do something about the regime. The North Korean regime itself would look over the border at China and see a nation that's lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty with economic openness and becoming a normal part of the international community. So there must be people in North Korea who like that Chinese model. Is there any hope of the Chinese bringing this lunatic Kim Jong-un to his senses?
I'd like to think that there is, and on Friday, of course, this latest round of sanctions starts to apply, and that's going to hurt the common people as well as hurt traders in China. But it's going to hurt the common people in North Korea much more, of course, than it's going to hurt the generals or President Kim himself. My kind of view on this is that by upping the ante and increasing the pressure in a financial, sanctions, trading, economic point of view, is that you may spark off something internally in North Korea. But I think the probability is far greater that if President Kim starts pushing himself and the country towards nuclear destruction, then someone within the leadership will move against him. Of course, this is a hope. This is what everyone is hoping lies behind all parts of the strategy, the Chinese, Russian, South Korean, Japan and the US moves and the United Nations, that someone will solve our problem for us. But all of that is a hope. And I think in these authoritarian nations, you're not going to move someone like Kim to act in the interests of the people.
Well, it's a big point. Publicly, we know so little of the internal workings of the North Korean government. Do you think our intelligence agencies would have any kind of decent handle on the power struggles and machinations within that regime?
It must be very, very hard for Western nations in particular when we see those famous photographs of North Korea at night where there's no internet, no lights, no activity compared to the countries around them. Using technical means to gain intelligence must be very, very difficult. The people that I think have the greatest intelligence are going to be South Korea. South Korea will have they've been infiltrating each other, North and South Korea, now for 50 years. And both sides have got a degree of paranoia about where the spies are in their own country. So I think we would have a good idea what is, we'd have some idea in the Western world out of South Korea of what they're trying to achieve. But if you look at it in the traditional way of looking at any country, and that is, you say they've got, in order to consider them a true enemy, they will need both the capability and the intent. They've certainly got the capability to invade South Korea, but by conventional means, but I'd put my money ultimately on the South Koreans and the Americans to win that. They've got the capability to hurt people in certain areas, particularly in South Korea and Japan, possibly with nuclear weapons, possibly on missiles, but also who knows what has been smuggled into any country anywhere. But whether they've got the intent at the moment will determine whether the Americans are prepared to take the risk of acting preemptively. And I think there's the big question for us all.
Well, just turning to another troubled nation, Afghanistan, where radical Islamists have been resurgent in their activities, Donald Trump has announced a new strategy. You've written about it in the past week for the Lowy Institute, describing Trump's plan as comprehensive, aggressive, resolute and more lethal. You're saying it's the best in 16 years because there's a commitment there to an open-ended military presence and putting pressure on Pakistan. Jim, this is rare praise in the foreign affairs space for Donald Trump, the beleaguered Donald Trump. Do you really think he can get the solution in Afghanistan?
Well, and what I'm referring to there is the policy. And of course, this is the great difference. Anyone can come up with a policy. And sometimes you wonder whether a policy is worthwhile coming up with at all, because it's the implementation on every one of these policies where everyone falls down. But the policies in the past have been pretty appalling in Afghanistan, and not just the implementation, but the policies. I mean, President Bush decided that he would have a light footprint after the extraordinary result achieved by certain elements within Afghanistan and American special forces to oust the Taliban. He then tried to hand over to NATO. That didn't go well. Obama tried to pull the troops out too soon. That didn't go well. So the reason that I say this is a good policy, not a good solution, but at this stage a good policy, is because we're doing two things. We're committing to a sustained presence, which we haven't done before. Look at Obama. He gave away the withdrawal date of his surge on the day he announced the surge itself. And secondly, that he's taking some action unspecified at this stage, or intends to take action unspecified at this stage against Pakistan. And of course, he's using against Pakistan the presence of India. So from that point of view, I say this is a policy which has got a chance of succeeding. And he's putting, we believe, some troops in, about 4,000 troops in, and if he puts them in the clever way, that is to use them as battlefield mentors, not just as people who stay in the barracks and do a bit of training for the Afghans, then because they're not prepared to take any risks, they boot them out the barracks door and they can go onto the battlefield and do what they like. That's why those reasons are why I think this has got a fair chance of success. But we haven't seen much implementation out of the Trump administration. And I wrote another piece for Lowy just before the one you quoted, where I said that we haven't seen yet the emergence of what everyone needs, which is a presidential administration which has got good advisors advising a president who has gained some experience, rather than either President Trump himself running it and President Trump plus a few military advisors running the whole world. And this is where I think we're in trouble.
Can I just ask, do you think this will mean an additional Australian troop commitment in Afghanistan?
Well, I believe that it should, but I've always believed that as part of the Western Alliance and for our own self-interest, we should be involved in these things. We've got 300 troops over there roughly at the moment. Both the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister have said that they will consider the request when it comes to them. I've often wondered why we need to wait for a request in all of these activities, but there you are, and I'm surprised that they've both been quite open about that. And if we do put extra troops in, I don't believe they will go to the area where the Americans are putting their 4,000 troops in, that is, as battlefield mentors. But anything is better than nothing in standing up to Islamic extremism throughout the world. And we certainly have some capacity and we certainly have some skills.
You've written, Jim, that Trump's aim is to force the Taliban to the negotiating table. A lot of people would be wondering, how do you negotiate with fanatics?
And that is the question. And he did put it very interestingly in the speech that he gave introducing his policy. He kind of said, you know, ultimately we'd like to have the Taliban come to the negotiating table, but we don't know when that's going to happen. So it didn't sit prime in his plan. What I also use in that post that I put on the Lowy blog, I said that there's a traditional way of looking at insurgency, and that is you can't kill your way to victory in an insurgency. But, and I think this goes to the essence of this policy, you can kill your way to a negotiating table. And no one in any of these conflicts negotiates when they think they've got a vague chance of winning. And we've seen that with the Taliban time and time and time again. They've said they'll negotiate, so we pull troops out, or we do this or we do that, then they don't negotiate. What he is trying to do by putting 4,000 Americans into a couple of 100,000 Afghans in the Afghan army is to generate an extraordinary leap in the capability of the Afghan army to get at the Taliban and other groups. And only by doing that, and it might take 1 or 2 years, but only by doing that and really hurting them are you going to force them to the table.
Well, thanks for your time and expertise, Jim Mole, and that's been fantastic, a briefing for our viewers on these two important international issues in North Korea and Afghanistan. After this short break, we'll be back with the great Zeg and his cartoon take on the week. Welcome back, where I'm joined by a bearded Zeg. What's happening here, Zeg? You've got the academic look. You look like some university trendy. This is a real worry, isn't it? You haven't flipped over to the other side, surely.
Never, Mark. G'day, fellow outsiders. Great to see you. Yeah, no, someone told me I look like Russell Crowe from Noah the other day, and I thought, oh, that's probably all right. I wish I had his money.
Oh, well, what about his wisdom? Let's have a look at your cartoons for the week. You've got the first one here giving us a new take on the pub test.
Oh, yes, look at this. How to fail the pub test. Of course, inspired by yesterday's madness from the the North Korean leader up there firing intercontinental ballistic missiles over foreign territories. Yeah, they're all in there talking about, you know, this guy's going to start a nuclear war. Will they reach us here? He's mad. The other bloke over there, where's my Bible?
Well, it is a bit incongruous in that we've got this missile crisis to the north of Australia and speculation about real trouble there, and in the Australian debate it's all about gay marriage and renewable energy.
There you go, that's how out of touch the whole thing is.
And speaking of which, our old favourite Gillian Triggs has advocated Sharia law in Australia, the divorce court seg. Show us what you've got.
Can you believe this, Mark? I mean, look at this woman. Sharia law is acceptable in Australia, she says. Well, there you go. We're in one of the many countries, war-torn countries, that currently have Sharia law. Fairly strict forms of it: Algeria, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Saudi Arabia, the list goes on. And there we go. Look at that poor chap there swinging from the balcony.
Oh, that's right.
Right, he's and the UN observer, if you noticed, he's got her wearing a blindfold, as the UN usually does, and he just says, "Sorry, Gillian, but here, that's what happens to a man when they find out that he's gay."
Well, the outgoing Human Rights Commissioner there has copped an absolute pasting for this suggestion, but there are mounting moves for Sharia law in Australia. We resist them here. Oh. We believe in the rule of law where all Australians are treated fairly by the system.
That's right.
Now let's go to our Outsiders Outhouse, where Zeg again has applied his graphic genius. There I am on the Thunderbox, the outhouse, the last place in Australia now where you've got a bit of freedom to do what you want to do.
That's about it.
And our submissions this week, the first comes via Twitter. First time we've seen one via Twitter. Peter Ford, everyone's favourite entertainment reporter, has written as follows. I love your show, Mark, and have no problem with robust debate. But next time ask Fred Nile, we had Fred Nile here last week, ask Fred Nile this. Fred, your campaign against same-sex marriage is based on your Bible teachings, but you married a divorcee. Bible says that it's wrong. How does that work? Well, that's a question for Fred Nile. But can I just say, I thought Mr. and Mrs. Nile presented not only as a loving couple here last week, but powerful arguments according to their beliefs on same-sex marriage, and I don't think their marriage is the issue really. It's about the extension of marriage beyond a man and a woman.
Mate, I wonder what part of the Bible Peter's looking at, because it actually does, and I'm a devout Christian, right? And I'll tell you now, there is no problem with marrying a divorced woman, right? Okay. If she's divorced in the eyes of God, there is no problem with this. Come on, Peter, what are you looking at? What testament are you looking at too, mate?
Well, Peter Ford, you run up against Zeg there in terms of biblical scholarship, so you're in trouble. And we have a follow-up submission to the Outhouse. It's from the guy last week. He didn't want to give his name for fear of losing his job, but he was at the Woolworths Liquor Distribution Centre in Melbourne, and he now gives us an update from Friday's Wear It Purple Day. He says the support of the LGBTI WTF community at Woolworths was an absolute failure. Out of 600 workers, Zeg, only 2 people wore something purple. And our mate writes, not even the gays and lesbians bothered with the stupid theme. Identity politics at its worst. Yep. The politically correct management warriors must be spewing. To think that some morons are getting paid to come up with these ideas is even more staggering. Great show again, mate. Well, thanks for that update. Mark, it looks like it was a real flop, as I think it was around the country, Zeg.
Mark, again, it's a case of they're listening to the left. The management is listening to the left. They're everywhere on the media, so then they're telling us, oh, the majority want this, the majority want that. There's a consensus. Everyone agrees. Well, wrong. And you're about to find out how everyone doesn't agree. Yeah, well, that's why they didn't want the plebiscite.
Well, we'll see that. We'll see how the vote goes, but it's virtue signalling by the corporate sector, and a lot of resistance there at Woolworths, quite sensibly so, from the workers. And finally, we have Gary at the Queensland University of Technology. This is a fascinating submission. He received a university email that was sent to all students in STEM, that's science, technology, engineering and maths, including information technology, who are predominantly male students. Now, the email was saying that METS, another acronym, Mining Equipment Technology Services, is mass hiring women with female-only jobs. And Gary writes about more discrimination. He asks, we have done nothing wrong as men, why can't we apply? And then here's the twist. The opportunity looks pretty nice, especially the paid internships. It's a pity myself and many others have been specifically excluded based on gender. He sent them an email saying, I identify as a woman. I don't though. No reply as yet. Well, of course, the left say that all gender is fluid. Gary has sent in the submission saying he's a woman, but he ain't going to get the job, is he, Zeg?
Mate, I'm bang. I mean, I've got no comment. It just, the madness rolls on this affirmative action stuff. I mean, it's got to stop, and we're onto it. We're onto it now.
I didn't know there was a med sector, but in mining equipment and technology services, why don't they just employ the best person for the job?
Spot on.
You know, the merit principle in Australia, women are getting majority jobs now as GPs, lawyers, federal public servants, and we don't need these employment quotas and gender reserved jobs in Australia because it runs directly against the merit principle that has made our country great in the past. Yeah. Now, Zeg, we've got the left lunatic of the week. Your drawing is a highlight of the show every week because you've got a wonderful collection of imbeciles here from the left side of politics. Here's the drawing where we award it to Stan Grant. You've got Stan there. What have you done to Stan?
Mr. Mantan himself. Well, I mean, he doesn't like Captain Cook, so I've drawn him as Captain Cook's stand-in. The new statue for Hyde Park, folks.
Well, the big news is Captain Cook did discover Australia from a European perspective.
Don't tell Stan that.
And all this rewriting of history is just another leftist push. The left, essentially, what they can't control in the present, they try to rewrite in the past.
Every time.
And it's, as Malcolm Turnbull correctly said, perhaps the highlight of his prime ministership, it's a new form of Stalinism, this rewriting of history. And Stan Grant, boy, what an own goal to look at the troubles in America and think, let's have a statue debate in Australia. So divisive. It's generated vandalism and a very divisive national debate. We need to bring Australians together around our common heritage and greatness as a country rather than being so divisive. Stan Grant at the ABC has divided the country in two.
Good on you, Stan. Idiot of the week.
Idiot of the week, absolutely. Well, Zeg, thanks for being here. I know on Sunday you, like me, will be enjoying the very special Father's Day. And I just want to say a call out to my kids. I'm very, very fortunate as a dad to have 3 loving children who are just absolutely fantastic. And I know they'll butter me up and look after me on Sunday, so I'm really looking forward to that. To all the dads out there, have a great Father's Day, a day to be celebrated. There's nothing greater in this world than parental love of children. And the nuclear family is still the greatest institution devised by Western civilization. And I want to thank Warwick Marsh from Dads for Kids and the Fatherhood Foundation, who've done great work for many decades promoting the virtues of fatherhood. Dads for Kids. You'll see their website at the end of this special presentation. We're going to go to the break. When we come back, we'll talk to Kiralee Smith about her issues with halal certification and her view on same-sex marriage. But as we go to the break, we want to pay this special tribute devised by Dads for Kids for Father's Day. Have a great day out there, all the dads on Sunday, and please support Dads for Kids as much as you can, and you'll see their website at the end of this special song.
Happy Father's Day.
Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Daddy's gonna sing you a lullaby. When you're sleeping safe and sound, you've got the proudest dad in town. I remember when I first saw you, your heart beating as you grew. We'll read you stories to help you dream. Your mommy and I are a perfect team. I can't wait to hear you sing or watch as you put on a wedding ring. One day you'll have children too. Remember the times I sang to you.
Welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders, where I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Kiralee Smith. Thank you very much for being with us. We've had a few debates in the media in the past, but I think these days we're on a unity ticket about the major issues facing the country.
Sure.
Now, you're in Sydney looking at the event last night with Corey Bernardi spoke at the Roseville branch of the Liberal Party, rebadged as the North Sydney Conservative Forum. I understand there were 300 in the auditorium to hear Cory Bernardi. You've joined the Conservative Party. What's happening there with the growth of the Conservative Party? How did it go last night? And is the Liberal Party base falling apart in Malcolm Turnbull's hands?
Yes, well, it was entitled "Is the Party Over?" Last night, and out of the 300 people plus who were there, they brought in extra chairs. It was a great feel to the night, and Cory was received extremely well among the crowd. There would have been a lot of Liberal Party members, but also a lot of ex-Liberal Party members, as well as just new Australian Conservative members there. I couldn't find anyone who was a fan of Malcolm Turnbull, I can honestly say that, and I spoke to a lot of people last night. But people, yeah, they're fed up with the state of play. They're fed up with the major parties. We hear it over and over and over again. Same themes last night.
What's the one policy thing do you think the Liberals have become disillusioned about the party base?
The policy? Oh, well...
It's not just Turnbull though, is it? It's the way, it seems to me, the way in which the Liberal Party has been taken over by political correctness.
Absolutely. They feel it's been infiltrated and taken over by the left. But even more than that, there's no principles that they're standing on anymore. You don't know, what are they going to come out with next? They're not standing and preserving or protecting or conserving what were traditional Liberal Party values. And when you compare that to Cory Bernardi and the Australian Conservatives, you know what Cory's principles are. He hasn't wavered for 11 years in public life and these 31 years in the Liberal Party. You know the consistency. You might not agree with him, but I think more and more people are agreeing with him and can see the wisdom.
Oh, he's certainly seen as a man of principle, which is a big asset in an environment where other politicians blow with the wind. So the Conservative Party seems to be growing. What's it like on the inside?
I'm loving it. People are really motivated. Last night, Cory said that about 70% of our members have never been a part of a political party in the past. We have a member who just turned 102. He's never been in a political party, and Cory said he's one of the most optimistic people on earth, obviously. But that's again the theme and the flavour, that people are now taking responsibility for politics in this country and are saying, I can't sit around the table and just whinge about the state of things if I'm not prepared to get up and have a go.
Well, at 102, he must be motivating people to get in and have a go. That's a great story. Now, in your own public life, you've started with halal choices as your issue and organisation. Tell us about that.
It's a really long story, and I call myself the accidental activist because it wasn't something that I set out to do. I've travelled a lot before I had children with my husband. We spent time in Islamic countries, and particularly meeting victims of jihad, apostates, people who have lived and suffered under Sharia. And that really opened my eyes and left me feeling very frustrated and like, what can I do? Not having a solution in the early 2000s to that, but keeping an eye on things that are happening. And then I heard about halal certification, and I thought, this is something as a mother, as a housewife who does the shopping, I just want some more information. And went to try and find some information, and within 4 hours found that this was an industry rife with controversy. And I'm a very justice-orientated person, so I'm sitting there going, this isn't right, this is not fair, there's something off here, and it provoked me to do further research. So basically over about 10 months I discovered that there was a lot of corruption in the industry. There was, the biggest issue for me and most consumers and people who follow me is that where companies are paying halal certification fees, they're not marking it on the label. So it's kind of like this marketing program that they don't want anyone to actually know about, which is strange. And then where was the money going? And it's been established beyond any doubt that the money promotes Sharia causes in this country, such as the profits go to mosques, Islamic schools and Islamic charities. Where it goes beyond that is still under question, and not even the Senate inquiry was able to get satisfying answers from that one, despite the fact that Sam Dastyari and others came out saying there's no direct link to funding terrorism. However, when Cory Bernardi questioned AUSTRAC, it was pretty evident that AUSTRAC haven't actually done the investigation. So
well, it has become a bigger issue because of Labor halal Senator Sam Dastyari. I suppose in Australian public life he's your absolute antithesis. The exact opposite of Kirralie Smith is Sam Dastyari, who's using halal as a political gimmick, a publicity stunt. Let's have a look at one of his ridiculous videos.
Here we are at King Kebab House in the heart of Campbelltown. We're going to make our own snack pack. Now, I'm going to let you in on a few of the secrets on how to make a good snack pack. So you obviously, importantly, have to start with the chips. Now, the key to a snack pack is actually making sure that you've got the balance right between the crispy chips and the succulent meat without actually getting the chips too soggy. The snack pack movement isn't only about the food product itself, it's also about making a statement about multiculturalism, about diversity, and respecting the fact that in this incredible city of Sydney, there is so many different cultures. And rarely do you find food being used as a political statement the way it's being used here.
Well, the only statement there is that Sam Dastyari is an absolute goose and dickhead. And I can assure you, Senator Dastyari, in southwest Sydney, I know that street in Campbelltown. I've lived in the southwest of Sydney for over half a century. We don't need you to tell us there are many cultures in our area. We've coexisted and built a pretty successful community over a long period of time. But Kiralee, Pauline Hanson copped a lot of flack for wearing the burqa into the Senate. They said it was disrespectful to Islam. Surely this halal Senator Dastyari, taking halal as his political brand, as a gimmick, trying to get publicity at any cost, stunts galore, using halal, isn't that just as disrespectful to Islam?
I actually think it's more disrespectful the way he behaves, in the sense that he mocks Islam by trying to tell us that halal is very important, at the same time as having a beer or, you know, I've seen a photo of him drinking wine out of a cask and saying that he's a non-practicing Muslim, which, you know, there really isn't any such thing. It doesn't make any sense. But so he's offensive to Muslims in the sense that he upholds halal in one hand, but alcohol is not halal. It is the opposite of halal. It is haram, and dabbles in both. Tries to preach to us all, but also diverts the issue. He himself, as the chair of the Senate inquiry, said that there's no doubt that there's a lot of shonks and corruption in this industry. He read the submissions, he was at the hearings, he knows that this is a very serious issue. He knows that the meat exporters in this country are desperately lobbying the government to have these recommendations implemented because it is harming Australian businesses. Our exporters are suffering with the prohibitive costs, and he just mocks everybody. He mocks Australian business, he mocks Muslims, and he mocks the rest of us as consumers.
Well, and ultimately he mocks himself, because most people think he's an absolute
You can't take him seriously.
goose. And the double standard, Hanson cops an avalanche of abuse. It was a stunt, but Dastyari's a poster boy for the ABC and Fairfax.
Absolutely. He's the king of stunts, definitely.
He's the king of stunts. Now, on another big issue, you've been getting a bit of exposure and good viewership for your videos on same-sex marriage and gender fluidity. How do you see the current debate?
Yeah, well, I think there's a massive appetite for people to have information and truth. So far, the Yes campaign has all been about feelings. You know, love is love, it's very emotive, but there's not any facts to undergird there's no argument. There's hashtags, but there's no argument. And I've been surprised in one sense, but not in another, that the last 3 videos I've done have had well in excess of 100,000 views each. And people are crying out for facts, for information. They understand that this is not an emotional issue. This will have serious consequences. It has had consequences in Canada, in the UK, in the US, and around the world. Your article in the Daily Telegraph, you know, really started to lay these things out. So I'm hoping that this is the direction the debate will take.
Yeah, I hope people have a close look at that Telegraph column, because I'm worried there's an inconsistency between the question that's being asked, which is just about same-sex couples, and the legislation they're proposing, which will bring in another 247 gender and sexuality definitions, most of which we don't know much about. If we don't understand that legislation, how can we support it? And the new definitions are all about gender fluidity. So as a parent, I don't want safe schools and gender fluidity. Boys can be girls, girls can be all this sort of nonsense. I don't want that in the school curriculum. Why would I want it in the Marriage Act?
Absolutely. And if we start redefining words, so if we redefine marriage now to mean a union of 2 people, or however many people, which I think will come, then of course what we're seeing around the world and what we're already seeing with the introduction of safe schools here is then we can't use words like male, female, mother, father, and gender defining words, because that's the flow-on effect. You start redefining one word, you have to start redefining the rest, and it's going to be chaotic. And as you said, and I agree wholeheartedly, this is the social Marxist agenda in the destruction of family, the destruction of this language, to see that. And it's all there in black and white for you to read.
Well, Kiralee, we've run out of time. Thanks for joining us. You've had a fascinating journey in politics, and we'll watch it with interest. You're across the issue, you're very articulate. Maybe you'll be a Senate candidate for Bernardi's party. That'll be interesting. Bernardi and the Conservatives are definitely on the march. Hopefully you've enjoyed the program, viewers. Thanks for watching Mark Latham's Outsiders this evening. We do try to bring you stories that you just don't see in the mainstream media. I don't agree with everything that's said on the program, of course, but in the name of free speech, we put the information out there for you to decide. We don't tell you how to think. It's up to the viewers to decide on these issues according to the information that we submit. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.